Jake Marshall stepped back from his truck and wiped the sweat from his brow. The June sun shimmered against the blue of the freshly filled pool, and for a brief moment, everything felt perfect. After months of bidding wars, inspections, and late-night paperwork marathons, he and his family had finally landed their dream home in the suburban enclave of Silver Glen. The neighborhood was eerily quiet. Perfectly trimmed lawns lined the cul-de-sac, where not even a stray leaf escaped notice. The houses were nearly identical, stuccoed, beige, symmetrical. HOA paradise, the realtor had joked. Jake didn't care. The house was big, the school district was top tier, and for once, life was looking up. His wife Amanda was already inside unpacking kitchen boxes, while their twins, Lily and Mason, chased each other around the living room with bubble wands. That's when he heard it, the knock. Not a friendly tap, a series of short, deliberate raps. Jake opened the door and was immediately met with the scent of lavender perfume and a smile that felt like it had been painted on with a ruler. She was standing on the welcome mat, her arms folded over a thick binder labeled Silver Glen HOA Compliance Division. "Hello, Mr. Marshall. Karen Whitmore," she said crisply, "President of the Homeowners Association. I like to greet our new residents personally." Her gaze swept past him and into the house. "Lovely layout," Jake forced, a smile. "Nice to meet you. We're still settling in. Got the pool set up yesterday." Karen's smile thinned. "Yes, I noticed. I wanted to mention a few things about that." Jake blinked. "The pool?" She opened her binder with surgical precision. "Above-ground pools, especially those exceeding 30 inches in height, require pre-approval. Article 12, Section B of the Architectural Guidelines." She tapped the page with a perfectly manicured nail. "It's not above ground," Jake said slowly. "It's built in." Karen gave a short, dry laugh that didn't quite match her expression. "We'll review the details. You may also want to revisit your mailbox placement. It's 1 inch too close to the curb. We like consistency." Before Jake could respond, Karen turned on her heel. "Oh, and one more thing," she called over her shoulder. "Your flamingo. Floaty may be fun for the kids, but it's considered an unsightly object. Please store it out of view when not in use." Jake watched as she walked briskly down the driveway and disappeared into her identical beige house across the street. His pulse quickened, not out of fear, but unease. She hadn't been there to welcome him. That wasn't a visit. It was a warning. That night, after tucking the kids in, Jake stepped outside to get something from his truck. The neighborhood was dead quiet. Not even a dog barking in the distance. But as he opened the passenger door, something caught his eye, tucked under his windshield wiper. A bright yellow paper, HOA notice, of non-compliance violation, unauthorized architectural modification, swimming pool correction, deadline, 72 hours failure to comply will result in fines and further enforcement actions. Jake stared at the notice, the ink still fresh, the edges sharp. How had she already filed a violation? He had moved in that morning. Behind him a curtain twitched in a window across the street. Karen's house. The lights were off, but he had the distinct feeling someone was watching. He crumpled the notice in his hand and turned slowly toward his front door. Something told him this wasn't the first game Karen had played, and it definitely wouldn't be the last. By the end of week 1, Jake knew he wasn't just living in a neighborhood. He was living under a microscope. It started small. A new citation arrived daily, always folded neatly in a plastic sleeve, always placed somewhere he'd find it immediately. The front door handle, the truck windshield, once even taped to his son's scooter. The first few violations were absurd. Trash. Bin left curbside 3 minutes past collection. Window curtains not HOA approved shade. Bicycle left on lawn. Visual disorder. Amanda tried to laugh it off. She's just bored. A petty control freak with a clipboard and nothing better to do. Jake wasn't so sure. By the second week, the tone changed. Less petty, more targeted. Pool ladder visible above fence line. Safety hazard. Inflatable flamingo. Not compliant with community aesthetics. Unapproved shade sale. To be removed immediately. Jake checked the HOA bylaws. There was no mention of flamingos. The shade sale was fine if it matched the houses. Color scheme. And theirs did. Yet the violations kept coming, each one more specific than the last, as if someone had walked through the yard with a magnifying glass. "I think she's watching us," Jake muttered one night, staring out the kitchen window. Amanda raised an eyebrow. "Like, actually watching?" Jake nodded. "You ever see her car leave? It's always parked there. Lights go on at weird hours. Yesterday, I waved at her and she just stood there, didn't blink, like I was the problem." Amanda paused. "Okay, that's weird." Later that night, Jake reviewed the footage from his new security system. At 1:14 a.m., the motion camera triggered. A figure walked past the edge of their yard, slowed, then stopped. Karen. Her posture was unmistakable. Rigid. Arms crossed. Her hair pulled into that perfect suburban bun. She stared toward the pool for 30 seconds, then turned and walked back across the street. No bag, no dog, no reason to be there. Jake saved the clip and marked it. Weird as hell. The next morning, a package arrived with no return address. Inside, a manila envelope with a typed message. "You're not the first." Inside were photocopied HOA letters, almost identical to the ones Jake had received, except these were dated years ago, different names, same neighborhood. Jake recognized the last name on one of the letters, Johnson. He asked around. The Johnsons were a nice couple with a toddler, had a big 4th of July party once. Huge hit with the neighbors. One day they just vanished. No moving truck. No goodbye. The house was empty for months. Karen called it a private family matter. But Jake was beginning to piece it together. Every violation was Karen's way of escalating, of wearing people down, turning rules into weapons. He was her latest target. Later that evening, Jake stepped into the garage to find another surprise. A fresh notice taped to the water heater. Unpermitted structural modification. Exposed electrical outlet. Deadline, 24 hours. He laughed bitterly. She's inside the garage now. Is she teleporting in? That night, Jake walked the perimeter of his fence and looked over toward Karen's house. The blinds were drawn. A single light glowed from the upstairs window. And as he stared, the light blinked off, like someone had been waiting for him to look. He went inside and locked every door. The violations were no longer the problem. Karen was. Jake's Saturday morning began with a scream. He bolted out the back door, nearly slipping on the slick deck, as Amanda stood at the edge of the pool, clutching her nose. The water had turned a sickly, iridescent black, rippling with a sluggish sheen that shimmered under the sun like gasoline. "Don't touch it," Jake shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her back. The stench hit him next. Burnt rubber, diesel, rot. It coated the air and stung his throat. Mason and Lily had been moments away from jumping in. "What the hell is that?" Amanda choked, covering her mouth. Jake didn't answer. He rushed to the garage, grabbed a pool skimmer, and dipped it into the sludge. It came up with thick black globs of oil, the kind he'd seen leaking under old trucks. The skimmer dripped onto the concrete, staining it like tar. Amanda's voice trembled. "Do you think this is some kind of leak?" Jake shook his head. "No leak smells like this. And oil doesn't just show up in a sealed pool overnight." He ran to check the pump. Off. He hadn't run it since yesterday. The pool cover was tucked away. There were no signs of anything falling in. Nothing accidental about it. That's when he remembered the cameras. He stormed inside and opened the app. The backyard feed had been recording all night, motion alerts pinging here and there. A raccoon, a passing car. He scrubbed to around 2 a.m. when the neighborhood usually went still. 12 a.m. Normal, 2:13 a.m. Static. 2:14 a.m. Still static. 06 a.m. Feed resumes. Jake blinked. No way. The file between 2:13 and 3:06 was corrupted. The only corrupted segment of the whole night. Amanda stood behind him, peering at the screen. Glitch? Or someone disabled it. She looked at him, her eyes wide. "You don't think she—" Jake didn't respond. He didn't need to. That afternoon, Jake drained the pool. As the last of the black water gurgled down the outflow pipe, a heavy residue clung to the walls. A sticky, toxic mess. It would take weeks to clean and thousands to repair. The worst part? The kids stood at the sliding glass door, watching silently. Their summer was over before it even started. The next day, Jake filed a police report. The officer was polite but non-committal. "You didn't see who did it," he said. "You have a suspicion, sure, but no hard evidence. Can't knock on someone's door with a hunch." Jake showed him the corrupted footage. The officer frowned, but just shook his head. "Not enough. Maybe install another camera system. Hardwired." "Great," Jake muttered. "So I just wait for her to do it again?" The officer hesitated, then said quietly, "Off the record, you're not the first guy I've talked to from Silver Glen. HOA drama's part of the job. But I've had 3 other reports in the last 5 years, all involving that same house." Jake's eyes narrowed, and none of it stuck. People either moved or stopped filing, but every time, same story, mysterious damage. No footage, no proof. That night, as Jake hauled the corrupted camera off its mount, he noticed something strange tucked under the fence. He reached down and pulled out a small object. A half-empty plastic bottle, labeled motor oil, used. The cap was still wet. He stared at it for a long time, until Amanda called him in for dinner. Jake didn't eat. He just stared out the window at the dim silhouette of Karen's house. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was war. Jake stared at the oil bottle on his kitchen table, like it was a murder weapon. Amanda sat across from him, arms folded, eyes darting toward the window. Every few minutes. "You know what this means, right? That she was on our property. At night. She sabotaged the camera system," Jake muttered. "She knew exactly when to strike, and she knew how to stay out of sight." Amanda's voice dropped to a whisper. "Jake, this is starting to feel dangerous." Jake nodded. "It already is." Later that night, after the twins were asleep, Jake went online and filed a report with the local environmental authority. The sludge had been hazardous. The smell alone made his throat burn, and they had 2 small kids. This wasn't a simple act of vandalism. It was an environmental crime. By morning, the EPA had responded. An inspector named Harold Klein arrived at the door just after 9 a.m. A heavy-set man in a faded government polo with deep crow's feet and a clipboard that looked like it had seen war. Jake led him out to the drained pool, the smell still faint in the summer air. Klein knelt down and took a swab from the pool tiles, his nose twitching. "Used motor oil, probably synthetic. This stuff's toxic." Shouldn't be within 50 feet of kids, let alone a pool. Amanda appeared behind them. Will it affect the soil? The groundwater? Possibly. Depends on the porosity of the surrounding earth. But if it got into your outflow pipe, Klein said grimly, we've got a whole other problem. He took a few more samples, then stood. I'll file the initial. Report by end of day. If it confirms what I think, this isn't just vandalism. It's a federal violation under the Clean Water Act. Jake felt his pulse quicken. What happens then? We investigate, and we prosecute. For the first time in days, Jake felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone would finally take this seriously. That hope didn't last long. 2 hours later, Klein returned from walking the perimeter of the neighborhood. He looked uncomfortable. I knocked on the neighbor's door, he said, glancing back at Karen's house. Ms. Whitmore. She wasn't exactly cooperative. Jake smirked. Let me guess. She played innocent. She said you've been harassing her, filing fake complaints. Suggested you tampered with your own pool to make her look bad. Jake's jaw tightened. She dumped poison in my backyard, and I'm the problem. Klein raised a hand. Hey, I've dealt with people like her before. Passive-aggressive to the core. But here's the thing. She's smart. She doesn't say anything actionable. No admissions. No evidence on her property. No witnesses. Amanda frowned. So what now? Klein hesitated. We dig deeper. I'll run the chemical profile. But unless we catch her in the act, or find proof she handled the oil, she walks. As Klein packed up, Jake followed him to his car. You've seen this kind of thing before, haven't you? Klein paused, then nodded. Suburban dictators. Control freaks with too much time and not enough conscience. Some people garden. Some people go to church. Karen Whitmore builds empires of fear with rules and fine print. As the inspector drove away, Jake stood motionless in the driveway, fists clenched. He wasn't just being targeted. He was being erased by a woman who had turned the law into a weapon. That evening, another letter arrived, stuffed inside the mailbox. Unsigned, typed. Drop the complaint, or things get worse. Jake read it. Twice. Then once more in the glow of the porch light, his jaw set. She had officially made her move, but she had just made a mistake. He wasn't backing down. Jake couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made him sit up in bed. Every car that passed made him grip the baseball bat he'd stashed by the nightstand. Karen's letter wasn't just a threat. It was a challenge. He wasn't going to run. He was going to dig. And he knew exactly where to start. Earlier that day, while draining the last of the oil-stained water from the pool, he'd noticed something odd. A narrow gap along the back fence line, partially hidden by an overgrown hedge. It led to a tiny utility shed, one he'd assumed belonged to a former homeowner, long forgotten. But now, it was all he could think about. At 2:12 a.m., the exact time the corrupted footage began the night of the oil dump, Jake crept outside with a flashlight, crowbar, and a phone set to record. The air was still. Karen's house was dark, but even. In the quiet, the paranoia buzzed in his ears like electricity. He reached the shed, locked of course. A rusted padlock that looked like it hadn't been touched in years, until he noticed the scratches near the latch, fresh ones, as if someone had opened it recently. With a quick jab, Jake pried the lock loose. The door creaked open, revealing a cramped space filled with stacked file boxes, old gardening tools, and 2 plastic bins marked Archive. Jake flipped open the first bin and froze. It wasn't gardening stuff. It was paperwork. HOA letters, complaint forms, photos, surveillance photos. One stack showed a couple walking their dog past Karen's house. Another featured a man stepping off it, his porch in a bathrobe. All were marked with red pen, non-compliant, violation locked, repeat offender. Jake's heart pounded as he picked up another folder, labeled Johnson, 2018. Inside, a full dossier on the family who used to live in his house. Photos, maps of their backyard, transcripts of reported violations, even a typed letter from the wife pleading with Karen to please stop harassing us. Jake's stomach turned. He reached for the next folder. Goyen, 2019. Same thing. Then another. Hartley, 2021. He was looking at a graveyard of homeowners Karen had driven out, one by one. At the bottom of the stack, he found something that didn't belong. A sealed envelope labeled, Contingency, do not open, Jake. Hesitated, then ripped it open. Inside was a typed confession. If this is being read, I've been reported. My actions are not criminal. They are defensive. Preserving the order of this community is my duty. I have documentation. I have evidence. I have leverage. Taped to the page was a USB drive. Jake's fingers trembled as he pocketed it. Suddenly, a beam of light cut through the shed window. Jake ducked and killed his flashlight. A shadow moved across the yard, slow and deliberate. Karen, he held his breath. She stopped outside the shed for several seconds, just far enough that her face was hidden in the dark. Then without a word, she turned and vanished between the hedges. Jake didn't move until 10 full minutes had passed. When he finally emerged, he didn't go back to bed. He plugged the USB into his laptop. The screen lit up with dozens of video folders, labeled by address, date, and homeowner names. He clicked on one. Footage from inside someone's garage. Another file, inside a kitchen. Another, a backyard. Hidden cams. Dozens of them. Jake stared in horror. Karen hadn't just been harassing her neighbors. She'd been watching them. All of them. For years. Suddenly everything made sense. The timing, the precision, the threats. And now he had the proof. But how much longer until she realized he did? Jake barely slept. By dawn, the sun hadn't even cracked the horizon when he was already on the phone with Harold Klein, the EPA investigator. He uploaded the USB contents into a private cloud folder, just in case. The material was damning. Footage of neighbors in their most private spaces, some clearly unaware they were being filmed. It was enough to sink Karen 10 times over. Klein's voice, when he called back, was tense. You're telling me she's been running a neighborhood-wide surveillance network? Jake didn't hesitate. I have footage, names, dates. It goes back 5 years. There was a long pause. Send everything to me now, securely. And Jake, don't talk to anyone else about this yet. I already filed the EPA complaint, Jake replied. But this is criminal. Exactly. Let's keep it quiet and move fast. But by noon, things were already spiraling. The internet went down first. Jake assumed it was a random outage, until the cable box blinked an unfamiliar code. Error, MAC conflict. Then his phone lost reception. He switched to Amanda's. Same problem. Amanda checked the neighbor's Wi-Fi. It worked fine. Only their house was offline. Jake ran to the garage to check the router. Completely fried. Melted plastic clung to the ports, like someone had zapped it from the inside. Then came the HOA email. It was short, cold, final. Your residence is in gross violation of community ethics and conduct. Effective immediately. A hearing has been scheduled to determine if your household qualifies for forcible removal under Section 9E of the HOA Charter. Amanda stared at the screen, pale. They can't do that. That's not real, right? Jake clenched his fists. Not unless someone rewrote the bylaws. And I bet Karen just did. He opened his HOA documents folder. But the files were corrupted. His backups too. Amanda gasped, "Jake, our bank account, it's locked." They logged into their online banking. Nothing. Frozen. An alert read, "Under fraud review, please contact your HOA banking liaison." Jake's breath caught in his throat. Karen had infiltrated everything. Utilities, finances, communication. She wasn't just retaliating. She was erasing them. Panicked, Jake bolted across the street to Karen's house. He banged on the door, the USB drive clutched in his hand. No answer. The blinds didn't twitch. The lights stayed off. But someone was watching. Jake turned slowly. In the distance, 3 neighbors stood at their windows, half concealed behind curtains. No one came outside. No one said a word. He walked back in silence. That night, Amanda and the kids stayed at her sister's house across town. Jake stayed. Behind. Someone had to. He installed a new hardwired camera system. Offline and encrypted. Then he checked the shed one last time, but it was empty. Cleaned out. At 3:08 a.m., the doorbell rang. Jake jolted awake, grabbed the bat, and crept to the front window. A figure stood in the dark, arms at her sides, eyes aimed squarely at the camera, now mounted above the porch. Karen. She didn't knock, didn't speak. She just stared into the lens and smiled. Then she raised her hand and held up something small and glinting. The original USB drive. Jake's blood ran cold. She had one too. Or maybe she had never lost hers at all. She stepped back into the dark. The doorbell rang again. This time, there was a letter on the mat. Jake picked it up with trembling hands. "You're not playing a game, Jake. You're playing a war. The question is, are you willing to lose everything just to win?" Beneath the note was a photo. Amanda, the twins, sitting at her sister's kitchen table. Taken that night. Jake backed away, heart pounding. This wasn't surveillance anymore. This was personal. The community center smelled like lemon polish and quiet rage. Jake sat at the long folding table, hands clasped, staring down a row of stony-faced HOA board members. Karen Whitmore sat at the center like a queen at her court, hands folded delicately, over a binder overflowing with documents. Her signature red blazer was sharp, calculated, a warning signal, disguised as professionalism. Amanda sat beside Jake, her leg bouncing anxiously. Across from them, a small group of residents filled the rows of folding chairs. Neighbors they'd seen at block parties, bake sales, Halloween nights. Now they all looked away. "Mr. Carter," one of the board members began, tapping his gavel lightly. "You've been summoned today due to numerous violations submitted by the HOA president, Mrs. Whitmore. These include unauthorized surveillance installations, tampering with communal property, and falsely reporting hazardous conditions, with intent to defame." Jake opened his mouth, but Karen raised a finger. "If I may," she said, "all silken poison. I have provided clear photographic and digital evidence of these offences. Mr. Carter has been combative, deceitful, and disruptive. His presence here threatens the integrity of our community." She passed out stapled packets. Each board member flipped through them. Jake stared in disbelief. The photos had been doctored. His face blurred into scenes he'd never been in. The surveillance clips were out of context, some appearing as if he had set up hidden cameras. Even Amanda was depicted in one image, holding a bottle of what looked like oil. "This is insane," Amanda hissed. "She fabricated all of this." Karen's smile barely twitched. Or maybe you're simply facing the consequences of your actions. Jake slammed his hand on the table. I have real evidence. Years of surveillance, illegal recordings, EPA violations. She poisoned our pool. I've already sent everything to the environmental agency, the board murmured. Karen's voice never rose. A convenient story. Except Mr. Carter's submissions were found to be corrupted, unverifiable. Jake blinked. What are you talking about? A board member turned to him. The USB you submitted was blank, and the cloud folder you provided is now inaccessible. Jake's stomach dropped. His throat dried instantly. That's not possible. Karen's smile widened, but her eyes burned cold. Perhaps next time you won't trust cloud storage, Mr. Carter. She's bluffing, Amanda said. Jake, tell them what's on the drive. The footage of the families. Karen pulled out a slim black remote and clicked a button. Behind her, a projector screen lit up. The image was of Jake, standing in his garage, hands hovering over a laptop. The timestamp had been edited to match the night of the oil dump. Here we see Mr. Carter preparing his so-called evidence. Karen said smoothly. Notice how conveniently the footage cuts just before the alleged incident. Jake stood up. That's not what happened. That's not the full video. Then where is the rest? One board member asked. Jake was silent. Karen struck the final blow. In accordance with Silver Glen HOA bylaws, Section 9E allows the board to issue a vote of expulsion for any member who poses a documented threat to community safety or cohesion. Gasps rippled across the room. The board took less than 5 minutes to decide. The motion passes. The chairman said quietly, You have 30 days to vacate your residence. Amanda's hand shot to her mouth. Jake sat frozen, too stunned to speak. Karen stood, graceful as ever. Don't worry, she said gently. We'll take good care of your property, and your children will be safer somewhere else. Jake's heart thundered. He'd lost, or so she thought, because tucked into his wallet, wrapped in foil, was the original USB, the real one, and he hadn't sent it to the EPA. He'd sent it to someone much, much worse. Jake stood in the driveway one last time, staring up at the house that had become his battleground. Amanda and the kids were already gone, moved to a rental outside the neighborhood. 30 days had become 7. Karen wasn't waiting for the calendar to catch up. Neighbors stopped waving. Friends vanished overnight. Even the mail came later than usual. He had been exiled, but Jake hadn't lost. Not yet, because he had one final card to play, and Karen had no idea it was about to hit the table. It started 3 days earlier, when Jake ignored Klein's warnings and sent the original USB, along with every file from the shed, including Karen's typed confession, to ABC7's investigative news desk. Not just any reporter either. Maya Ellison, known citywide for burying corrupt city officials, crooked cops, and shady CEOs. She didn't just report, she destroyed. Jake had labeled the package, Neighborhood Dictator Exposed. Years of illegal surveillance, environmental crimes, and evidence tampering. 2 days later, Maya replied with a single sentence. I hope Karen Whitmore likes cameras as much as she uses them. At 9:03 a.m. on the 8th day, a convoy rolled in, first. A white van marked EPA Hazardous Response Unit. Second, a black SUV with Federal Communications Commission stenciled on the door. Third, 3 news vans from local and national affiliates. And finally, Maya Ellison, stepping out in heels and a blazer like a general marching into battle. The community center became the battlefield once again. Only this time, Karen wasn't in control. Maya took the podium and turned to the assembled crowd. Neighbors, HOA members, even Karen's sycophantic inner circle. Today, we're investigating credible evidence that multiple federal crimes have occurred in this community, orchestrated by one of your own. Karen Whitmore, HOA president. Karen stood slowly, her face a mask of pleasant confusion. This is outrageous. These people are trespassing on private. Maya raised a hand. Save it. You can address the federal investigators outside, who just confirmed your surveillance network was illegal under the Wiretap Act. Section 2511. A collective gasp. Cameras flashed. Then came Harold Klein, stepping up to confirm EPA findings. Synthetic motor oil, laced with heavy metals, traced directly to a brand Karen had bulk ordered, using HOA funds. A chemical match. I'd estimate fines totaling up to $500,000, Klein said flatly. Minimum. Karen's face cracked. No, she said, voice rising. No, I won't be framed by this. This nobody. They broke into my shed. They tampered with... You mean the shed you never disclosed in the HOA plan? Maya asked. The one with dozens of hidden files documenting homeowners' lives? A large monitor powered on beside the podium. Jake's footage played, dozens of clips. Karen spying through slats, adjusting cameras, typing up violation notices while zooming in on kids playing in backyards. The room went silent. One board member stood up. I didn't know she was watching all of us. Another followed. She fined me for painting my shutters. She had footage. Karen's control unraveled in real time. No, she screamed. You're all ungrateful. I protected this place. Then came the twist. Jake stepped forward, holding a small leather-bound book, Karen's HOA amendment binder. I found this tucked under her desk, he said. Handwritten changes to the bylaws, including Section 9E. Never voted on, never approved, forgery, fraud. The final gavel. An officer approached Karen. You're under arrest for unauthorized surveillance, environmental violations, and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As they cuffed her, Karen's eyes locked on Jake. You think you've won, she hissed. This place needs me. Without me, this neighborhood falls. Jake gave a small smile. Good, let it fall? Epilogue 2 months later, Jake returned, not to stay, but to film a follow-up segment with Maya. The HOA had dissolved. Several board members resigned. Karen's house stood empty, its shutters flapping like loose teeth. The neighborhood was quieter now, and for the first time, truly free, because the watchful eye was gone, and justice had finally found its way home.